Here's what's coming up on episode 113 of the Big Seance podcast. Brandon Massullo.
And I think bioenergetics is an important part of paranormal phenomenon that's often overlooked. For the most part, I think a lot of times there's a lot of focus on, the actual experiences and not, the actual apparition. The equipment is sort of testing the environment, what's going on in the environment. I think a lot of times they take for granted what's actually happening inside the witness or the person who had the experience. So there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, electrical happenings going on inside of us. And once we figure out a little bit more about that, then I think we'll have a better answer as far as, how that relates to paranormal experiences.
What do you want to tell paranormal investigators about the EMF meter?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have?
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Our guest here in the parlor today is Brandon Massullo. He is a clinical therapist and parapsychologist residing in Medina, Ohio. Fascinated by paranormal phenomena for more than 20 years, Massullo has been a participant in and featured speaker at numerous paranormal forums and events. He studied psychology and parapsychology at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. His research has been cited in numerous parapsychological journals, articles, and mainstream books. His new book, which I'm almost done reading, and we'll be talking about it today, is The Ghost Studies: New Perspectives on the Origins of Paranormal Experiences. And his website is hauntedtheories.com. Welcome to the parlor, Brandon.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm super pumped and excited. It's as soon as I saw this book, I was so excited. It has a great cover too.
Oh, isn't that the best cover ever?
I know you're not supposed to judge it by the cover and all, but it is a beautiful cover.
It is beautiful. The guy who did that was amazing. And that's what sold me on the name. Because I had a different name for the book. I wanted it to be called Haunted Theories. But when I saw the cover, I'm like, perfect. Looks beautiful to me.
And I have to tell you that, everything in the book it's a refreshing look. You're not hearing the same things that you've read in other books. And it's kind of an updated look at these things. So I'm excited to get into it. But before we do, I offer everyone a pretend drink in our seance parlor. So what'll it be, sir?
You know what would really go well right now? Like a scotch on the rocks with maybe like just a splash of water in there.
Man, you are fancy. That's awesome. That might be the first hard liquor we've had really? Here in the parlor.
I spent a year in Scotland, so they got me hooked on scotch.
I was going to say, you'd have to be kind of adapted to that by now.
Yeah, you don't have a choice over there.
With this book, I can't wait to get into your thoughts on bioenergy and the necessary ingredients for a haunting and your haunting hypothesis. And so, but first, I don't know how I'd kick this interview off without hearing the story of why you got into parapsychology.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell your fans right now, it's not a very entertaining story. I don't have a cool experience. I didn't have some sort of ghostly encounter when I was young. I didn't live in a haunted house or anything like that. Actually, I kind of had an experience. I was over a friend's house, and he had seen, it was a sleepover. I think we were about 14 years old. And in the middle of the night, he'd seen a ghost. And he woke up, obviously scared, and started asking me some questions like, what are ghosts? Are they real? All these questions. And basically, I just stared at him, and I didn't really have any answers to that. So the one thing I do if I don't have answers is I usually go to books. So I picked up a book on parapsychology, went to the library, read through everything they had at the local library, headed over to Barnes and Noble, bought some more books, and so my curiosity piqued in parapsychology. And parapsychology is the study of, it's not the way that you define it, but pretty much everything that's paranormal. So that's your psi, your ESP, your telepathy, remote viewing, consciousness type of applications. And obviously ghosts fall into that category as well, reincarnation too. So I really just got really fascinated with that. Ended up going to college for psychology. And while I was studying psychology, I'll never forget this. It's sort of burned into my brain. I talked to one of the professors after one of his classes, and I said, I want to get into parapsychology. And he looked at me like I was on fire and basically said, I don't think that's a good idea. He said, you can't find a job, blah, 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 all this negative stuff. So it kind of deterred me from it. So I ended up getting a master's degree in counseling, worked as a therapist for a while, but I also had that nagging want to go back into parapsychology. So that's when I went overseas to University of Edinburgh in Scotland and studied parapsychology over there. And I started doing some research, basically in ghosts. It was a thing called environmental sensitivity in ghosts. And the cool part about it was done at a haunted location over there called Mary King's Close. I started to do research over there, really enjoyed it even more. Then when I came back to the States, I got a full-time job doing some clinical work. But I always had that urge to sort of sit down and put my thoughts on paper, and then out came the book. I've been going to paranormal conferences probably for the last 10, 15 years or so. I'm mainly in the background. So I've always been interested in it, but it's been probably this last year with the book coming out that people are starting to know who I am a little bit, which is very, very great.
It is so interesting that it was someone else's experience that started you out on this journey.
Yeah, it really was, because, and that's who I am, really. When someone asks me a question I can't figure out, it bothers me. So, we were at this sleepover, and the sleepover, the person's house, they live next to a cemetery. And so, we knew the stories about the ghosts in the house. So it was a good, going over there, people would tell the stories. It was always there's a woman that comes by. She's dressed in, I think, 1940s clothes, and she walks around the basement. And you kind of think, oh, yeah, you're just trying to scare me. And, and then this kid actually wakes up at 1 a.m. screaming, And I'm like, what's going on,
Wow.
So, it was kind of like I was present during an apparitional experience or a ghostly experience, and that kind of blows my mind. It's such an awe-inspiring thing to happen that you kind of get caught up in it. And I think a lot of people who are in the hobby or the paranormal field, whether it's their own experiences or someone close to them, that sort of pulls them into this field.
You talked about your professor that kind of told you it wasn't a good idea for parapsychology. Was that more because of, like you said, having a job and making money, or was it more of because of a stigma maybe that parapsychology had in his view?
I think it was a little bit of both. In mainstream academia, and this is 20 years ago, so I think he was more along the lines of, a lot of their research isn't up to standards, blah, 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 blah. But I think he framed it into you're not going to make any money. There's no places here in the States that'll actually teach you how to do that. So he just listed a lot of negatives to going into that. I don't really know what his views were. He was a cognitive psychologist. So, but that's the thing, like surface level parapsychology, if you just read about it on Wikipedia or read an article about parapsychology, you don't get the real feel for it. When you start actually reading the journal articles and the research and start seeing the significant results that a lot of these research are getting, that psi, there's some pretty significant evidence to back up that psi or telepathy or ESP is a pretty easily validated form of communication. And unless you pick up all these studies or have time to do that, you really don't appreciate parapsychology and a lot of the research that's out there. And I think a lot of these people, professors maybe in psychology, or, they're so focused on their other stuff that they don't spend, like I do, 6-7 hours a week reading stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you'll have to let me know if there's a better place to start. You talk about several ghost theories and popular theories out right now, but what I'm really interested in getting you to talk about for us is your ideas on bioenergy, bioenergetics, and human electrical fields. And so can you just I found this fascinating. And so can you talk about what bioenergy is? Sure.
So bioenergetics is kind of a fancy word to describe the energy that kind of happens in our bodies. So all of us humans are electrical beings, right? So basically that means that from the neurons inside my brain to my heart pumping to basically, even if I read text, there's electrical signals or impulses that are sent through my eyes into my brain, touch. So there's a lot of electricity inside our own bodies. So the idea is with bioenergetics is sort of the study of that electricity. Why is it there? What's it doing? What purpose does it have? How does it affect us? And I think bioenergetics is an important part of paranormal phenomenon that's often overlooked. For the most part, I think a lot of times there's a lot of focus on, the actual experiences and not, the actual apparition. The equipment is sort of testing the environment, what's going on in the environment. I think a lot of times they take for granted what's actually happening inside the witness or the person who had the experience. So there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, electrical happenings going on inside of us. And once we figure out a little bit more about that, then I think we'll have a better answer as far as, how that relates to paranormal experiences. But in the book, I go over quite a bit about bioenergetics. And I think that it's an important thing for a lot of people who are interested in the paranormal just to look it up, just look some research up on it, look about what happens inside our bodies. And when people get a better idea of that, I think they'll be really, really surprised. And in the book, I point this out quite a bit about, how important that is in actually ghostly encounters.
And what I also thought was interesting because it relates to part of what I do at school in vocal music. We talk about resonance in vocal music, and you went into resonance, and I'm forgetting the term you used, but remind us how you talked about when something resonates, it's because it has the energy is moving at the same rate of speed as, like you've talked about the earth, like the earth has a energy and you can match the earth. And how does someone how does something or someone resonate with something?
Well, basically resonance is like you mentioned, just sort of that like connection. Oftentimes when we see a movie that we really like, we say, wow, that movie really resonated with me. So it really, we were really on the same page. So the basic, the research that I go over in the ghost studies is that our minds are more or less entangled or connected with the minds of others, and can more or less synchronize at great distances with the help of the Earth's atmosphere. And this is where the Schumann resonance comes into place in the book. And when this synchronization happens, information is sometimes transported or shared. And when we resonate with somebody else, it's like matching frequencies. So you're driving in your car and you change the radio station, right? So if you want to listen to 92.5, you change your dial to 92.5. Now these frequencies and radio signals are always in the air, but until you turn it to 92.5, your car doesn't match up with that frequency. So once you turn your dial, you're matching frequencies with the radio waves in the air, and it's picking that up and coming into your car. So this synchronization, this entanglement, I believe that this is sort of the starting point of a paranormal phenomenon. And, the research in the book, so the type of information passed. So let's say we synchronize with somebody, or we have sort of a telepathic message with somebody. Often what's communicated is visual images, feelings, hunches, visions, and voices. So in the book, I kind of go over this idea that emotions related to crisis events are sort of the catalyst for experiencing apparitions and hauntings. And this huge emotional distress that we go through in a crisis situation sort of causes or triggers these internal biological fluctuations that we mentioned with bioenergetics, which in a sense tunes our biological antenna to the information in the environment and kind of leads to these ghostly encounters. So what I do in the book is I go over some crisis apparitions and deathbed visions, and I kind of say, step one, this is kind of my theory is that emotional disturbance happens, a crisis. This triggers bioenergetic fluctuations inside us because we're all electrical beings, and it sort of causes us to, in a way, have our biological antenna sort of shoot up and then communicate at distances, just like sort of radio signals and frequencies do. And then this is when you have this paranormal experience.
When you talk about this, and as I was reading this information about emotions and the crisis stuff, it made me think of what residents of Hawaii must have gone through recently when they mistakenly got an urgent text saying there was a missile headed their way and that it wasn't a drill. And have you wondered if there was I don't mean this to be a joke, but have you wondered if there was an increase in apparition seen on that day? Because, if someone is, I heard there were a lot of people that didn't really take it seriously, but apparently there were plenty of people that completely freaked out and went into crisis mode. So it did make me wonder if any of them had some stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, the basis of my theory is sort of based on a thing called the Psi Hypothesis. And what the Psi Hypothesis basically says is that, I'll answer your question. I'm going about it roundabout.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
You're the expert.
No, well, don't say that. People are going to start emailing me. There's no experts.
Okay. I get it.
Yeah. So the Psi Hypothesis, and Lloyd Auerbach is a big proponent of the Psi Hypothesis, and I'm sure everyone knows who he is. It basically, Psi is an encompassing term in parapsychology, which describes clairvoyance, psychokinesis, remote viewing, telepathy, that type of thing. But the basic idea behind the Psi Hypothesis is that person A, who is, let's say, the sender, sends a telepathic message usually during a distressful event, which is picked up by person B, who's the receiver. And this message is interpreted as a auditory, visual, tactile, whatever, the emotional feeling, something like that. So the Psi Hypothesis contends that ghosts aren't not so much like discarnate beings, but rather the workings of ESP, telepathy, thought transference, and communication at a distance between living and deceased people. So what does this mean when you talk about the Hawaii incident? So if you have someone who is in a distressful situation, they feel like maybe their life is coming to an end, they have all these overwhelming emotions, perhaps there was some sort of telepathic communication to somebody in the mainland, if you want to say that. There's been numerous examples of things like this happening. You have someone who's sitting at home minding their own business, and all of a sudden they get an overwhelming feeling of fear, or they get an overwhelming feeling of worry, anxiety, and then they get a phone call 2 minutes later saying that their son or daughter was just robbed or mugged or something like that. So somehow this son or daughter who is miles or states away in a life-threatening event, going through fear and anxiety and all that, somehow communicated that to their parents telepathically through the environment. So maybe in the Hawaii situation, you might have had some people on the mainland who just had these unusual, overwhelming sense of fear, like they're going to die or something like that. And that's what telepathy is. I mean, it's not like picking up the phone and giving someone a detailed explanation. It's just a feeling or a hunch, that something is not right with someone who you love. So that there probably was an increase in that, I'm guessing, yesterday. But again, it's tough to really pinpoint any of that.
And we were probably missing a main ingredient in that, and that is that the energy of the world knew that it wasn't a real thing, maybe,
Yeah.
Like we didn't necessarily know it was false alarm, but.
Yeah. There's a lot of research out there. it's slipping in my head, it's slipping in my mind at this time, but they have these random number generators that are located throughout the world. And usually with random number generators, you're going to get the same amount of it basically flips between 0 and 1. And what you're going to get on a normal day is an equal number of ones and zeros. That's kind of how it should play out. But what they find is that when there's an event that sort of affects the entire world, like 9/11, or a tragedy like the hurricanes or something like that, they find that these random number generators that are usually just even number ones and zeros start changing. So there's a significant change in that. So there's way more ones than should be expected. And the idea is that somehow if the collective minds are focusing on one thing, it sort of changes the environment, and sometimes could change things just as minute as a random number generator. And they've shown this to happen during these worldwide tragedies or events, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it. So if the world together just focused on something, it possibly could have there could be a way it could sort of change things, which is bizarre, but at the same time, I guess it's fearful, but at the same time encouraging if it's put to good use.
The random number stuff is fascinating. We talked a lot about that with Dominic Parker in, let's see, what episode was that? In episode 105, when we talked about his Am I Psychic app. Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't heard about the Am I Psychic
Yeah, you should check that out. It had a lot to do with random number generators, and I'd never really thought a lot other than using a random number generator in my class sometimes, to determine who's next. I hadn't really thought of any power to that, and he was talking about 9/11 and random number generators, and it's fascinating stuff.
They've been used in parapsychology for a number of years. They used to use the random number generators to test psychokinesis. So, the ability to influence objects with your minds. They would tell the person who claimed to be able to do that, make more ones come up than 0 on this machine. And so they've been using things like that for a number of years. And I think the recent stuff that we talked about is pretty fascinating. So if anyone's interested in that, I can't remember the name. I think it's the Global Coherence Project might be what it's called. That sounds familiar, but I think there's one or two out there that have pretty good research on this.
What do you want to tell paranormal investigators about the EMF meter?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have?
That's why I jumped a few questions, actually, because I figured you had some stuff to say about this one.
Well, I can go on for hours, or I could answer it in 30 seconds. The EMF meter is, as I can't think of a paranormal team or a paranormal reality show that doesn't really use an EMF meter. And this is as long as I could remember watching. So the EMFs, electromagnetic fields, are almost synonymous with paranormal investigations. In the book, I think I have 1 or 2 chapters devoted to it, just because I want to make sure everyone has all the education and research that's actually out there regarding EMFs and ghostly encounters. So the first thing I'll start off with would be, is there a correlation between energy or electromagnetic fields and ghostly encounters? And I think there is a correlation to it. We see it in a lot of the research, and then we also hear a lot about it from people who are out there actually, paranormal, actually investigating at these haunted locations. So that's where I would start. I think that there is a correlation. What that correlation is, I'm not really sure. So when I say that, I mean, does EMFs or electromagnetic fields cause people to perceive that you're having a paranormal experience? Or is it the other end of that? Do spirits or ghosts or whatever influence the electromagnetic field, which in order to manifest themselves? And that's what these paranormal investigators are actually picking up on. I mean, it's evident that we're sort of immersed in all types of geomagnetic and electromagnetic fields. And these occur from man-made electricity or simply just magnetic fields produced by the Earth. And since we're constantly navigating this ocean of electromagnetic spectrum, I think what's clear is that EMFs can be manipulated by mundane things like clocks and iron mesh beds, and they form these sort of fluctuating magnetic fields which can induce experiences. Every time I run into a paranormal investigation team, I shouldn't say every time, a lot of times, they all have stories like this. Well, we called into this place and there was a teenager who was having these experiences. And when we did the readings, we found that there was a very high reading or weird reading by their bed. And once we removed the clock or the fan, then the experiences went away, and then they attribute it to something like that. So I think there's a lot of teams out there that are kind of finding this happening in the field. I don't know. Have you ever heard of Michael Persinger and the God helmet and all that research that's been out there on that?
A little bit, yeah. And I remember reading about it as well in your book.
Yeah. I think that's kind of where it all started. This was back in the 80s. He had basically what the God helmet is. It's like a motorcycle helmet, and they put it on people's heads. And what it does is, and this is going to be a very crude explanation, but it kind of shoots electromagnetic fields into certain areas of the brain. And when they did that in the lab, what they found was that people who were just sitting in a laboratory were starting to have sort of paranormal experiences, sense of a presence. Some were actually seeing apparitions. So they thought, well, maybe this is what's happening. So maybe we figured out what's causing ghosts. And then they went out in the field and they found that fluctuating or erratic magnetic fields were found in places that were supposedly haunted. And so that's kind of where the magnetic field thing started from. But then things started going a little bit further from that, and people started detecting EMFs and sort of correlating them to ghostly encounters. And I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know which is which. I don't think it's all this or it's all that. I mean, research will tell us that these fluctuating EMFs can cause physical symptoms, but there's not really an EMF reading which proves there's a ghost is present. It's not like if it's between a certain range, that means there's a ghost there. But I think a lot of these paranormal investigators are finding that sometimes they find these EMF fields that are fluctuating, erratic, and actually move around or follow people. So if you have an EMF that's moving throughout the room, obviously that's not the washing machine because that's just hanging out in the kitchen. But if it's going up and down the steps, disappearing, reappearing, sort of walking like a person, then you can say this doesn't seem to be right. Maybe it's correlated with a ghost or something like that. What I would say is for anyone who gets into the paranormal field, I think it's important to know everything you can about energy, electricity, and basically all the research out there on the correlations between that and ghostly encounters. In the book, I really take 2 chapters to explain everything out there. And I give some examples, and I really talk about just knowing what's out there. I really don't give my opinion either way because I really don't have one. There's no way I can say that energy draining from your batteries or video equipment isn't correlated to ghosts. But it's people's personal experiences, which I would never say they're wrong. So I think in the book, I sort of point out everything that's going on and let the reader decide how they really view EMFs fit into ghostly encounters.
Yeah, it's one of the first lessons that I learned when I was actively investigating with my team for a couple of years is, that darn K2 meter that is so fascinating when people watch it and then immediately your brain goes, ghost, 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 ghost.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and this was about the time that smartphones were just really coming on the scene. And when you start realizing that they're now just watches and every possible device in the world, and when my phone could be a whole room away and receive a text message and the K2 meter goes cray cray, it's like, if that's all it takes for that energy to like manipulate then what makes me think I know anything that's going on on an EMF meter, And so there were a lot of those lessons at the very beginning. And it's hard because there were a few moments that we had, one in particular, that it took me a while to kind of wrap my brain around it. We really did feel some crazy energy going on in our bodies in this small location. And some of us had a few, minor personal experiences in this space. and this happened at the same time. And we didn't know everything about the smartphones. There was a couple of us with smartphones. And so then we're like, okay, well, obviously we can't hold smartphones and we have to turn them off and all those things have to be off. But then I'm like, oh, but I'll never know what that really was. It could have been some kind of cool experience there, but because I realized one of those little blips could have been a text message or something, it's like, forget it. Now I can't, I'm going to be completely skeptic about it from now on.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, you really got to make sure you try to control the environment as best you can, turn off all the equipment, do this, do that. But it's such a struggle because, there's so much going on in the environment, electricity, energy, whatever you want to say, but it's really tough to get an accurate reading with a K2 meter or something handheld when there's just so much going on. There was research that I read where somebody was taking like 90,000 magnetic samples during his research. This was through a computer and numerous sensors. And I thought to myself, it's impossible to get that with an EMF meter. I mean, it's just impossible. So you really gotta, I think they're a good tool to have on paranormal investigations to rule things out and to notice weird changes in energy, but it's always important to do baseline readings at haunted locations. So you want to show up maybe 2-3 days at a location and really get a feel for what the baseline magnetic field or the magnetic readings of a location are. Because what could be erratic, fluctuating EMFs could be the air conditioning turning on at 3 a.m. or it could be, you know what I'm saying? So you really got to get a feel for a place before you actually start making conclusions or providing it as evidence. And I think a lot of times it's tough because, for the average weekend paranormal investigator, they don't have access to a place for 4 days in a row to take baseline readings and do all that. So they're kind of in a time crunch in a way.
So, you've probably, if you listen to the show, you've probably heard me ask similar questions to this, but I know and am jealous of so many individuals who claim to be channeling things left and right and achieving spirit communication successfully on every device and tool that they try. And can you tell me why some people may be having these experiences more frequently?
Yeah. I think my research in the paranormal started with kind of a question similar to that. Why are more people prone to having these paranormal experiences? I never had one growing up. I've never really had one as an adult either. So I kind of thought to myself, in a way, it's like I'm kind of jealous of everybody who's having these amazing experiences.
Because it's part of the journey. You want to have them, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing experience. It's life-changing in a way, and I'm not sure what the percentage of people who sort of claim to have psychic sensitivity or mediumship abilities, but, I think this has kind of grown considerably in the last 10 years. And I don't know if that's more or less because people are more willing to talk about it, but this increase has sort of led me to think, okay, let's take a different look at that. So what I think is that there's a thing called environmental sensitivity that makes people more prone to ghostly encounters. So, I don't have this gift. I'm not environmentally sensitive, but what environmental sensitivity is, I want to make sure environmental sensitive is not related to psychic sensitivity. So those people who claim to be psychic sensitive can sense or communicate with the deceased. Those people who I classify as environmentally sensitive are simply affected by the surrounding environment to a higher degree than the normal population, right? So you experience the world differently than I experience the world, right, Patrick? We both have different perceptives. When we walk into a place, I might be able to, if I walk into somebody's home, I might be able to smell what they had for dinner yesterday. I might be able to smell all kinds of things, and then you might not be able to smell anything. Your color perception might be more acute than mine. You might get I might get headaches if the lighting is not right. So our view of the world is completely different. And I found that, as humans, we are affected by and react to the environment in extremely different ways. And it's been suggested that the physical environment affects certain individuals more than others. And this kind of leads to these environmental conditions and dysfunctions and things like that. So if we think about the sense of taste for a second, there's people who can taste foods, but there's these individuals called super tasters. I don't know if you've ever met anyone like that, like this, but they could really put an M&M in their mouth blindfolded and tell you if it's a red one, a green one, a blue one, or something like that.
Wow.
So how do they do that, right? It's amazing. They just have an extremely advanced sense of taste. And they're experiencing greater intensity than the general population, at least in taste. And this is true for environmental stimuli as well. So Michael Jauer, who's a researcher, wrote a book called The Spiritual Anatomy of Emotions, and he did a lot of research in this area. But basically, there's a lot of individuals who are just more attuned to the environment. So their sensitivity to low-level stimuli causes symptoms. And so these people who are insensitive to the environment commonly report allergies, chronic pain, fatigue, migraines, sensitivity to lights, sounds, and smells. And if you know, when I talk to people who claim to be psychic and sensitive to ghosts or energy, they tend to have a lot of these similar things too: chronic pain, migraine, sensitivity to lights and smells. So what we found is that those people who are would be classified as really sensitive, 70% of those people who are classified as environmentally sensitive had paranormal experiences, which is a huge number. Why? What's this correlation? What's going on there? And there's been other research into it, and they found a relationship as well. So there's this idea that these people who are really attuned to the environment are really sensitive to it, or pick up on things that the normal general population don't. They might have a better antenna or biological radio in a way, and maybe they're picking up things either in the electromagnetic spectrum than the general population isn't. So, if we're all radios, all radios have the basic equipment to pick up or tune into radio waves. However, there's some radios that are, thousands of dollars, which are pretty sophisticated and able to pick up stations more clearly from across the coast. Maybe certain people are like those sophisticated, expensive radios. They're just picking up on things in the environment. So this sensitivity to the environment makes them more prone to paranormal, psi, and haunt type experiences. So while me and you or the general population can have an experience, it's more likely to be detected in this special group. And the research in the book supports that those who are environmentally sensitive have way, way, way more paranormal or apparitional experiences than the general population. And that's what my research at Mary King's Close went over. I took Mary King's Close as a haunted location in Scotland, and I categorized people as sensitive or non-sensitive, took them through the tour. And what I found was those people who were environmentally sensitive experienced twice as many haunt type phenomenon than the general population. And this was just in a study that was conducted in a week. So, so it's kind of amazing. Like, I don't know if I know the answer about why this group is, I have my theories, but why this group has more paranormal experiences. But it's definitely something in parapsychology that people have looked into.
Do you think, and this might not even really be relevant, but do you think that this is a condition that we don't really recognize as much as we should? Is it a condition, or like, does the medical world really see these as? Yeah,
the United States is a little behind in recognizing this as a condition, but there's things out there called environmental illnesses, multiple chemical sensitivity. And basically with that, these things are, imagine being so sensitive to chemicals that, it's you can't even really go to work. It's the person's perfume causes you headaches and vomiting. And so I think in Canada and maybe Sweden, it's actually you can be on disability for conditions being too sensitive to the environment that's going on around you. So it is a condition. I think, in the States, we kind of look at this differently than the other countries, but I think it's getting to that point. There's a lot of research on environmental sensitivity or multiple chemical sensitivity, electromagnetic field sensitivity. It's kind of what the research says is it's kind of 50-50. 50% say, yeah, there is something going on. 50% say these people are just lying and it's all in their head. But, fibromyalgia, when it first came out, that sounds like it's like a release of a music record.
When that album hit.
Yeah, when the fibromyalgia album hit. But, 20, 30 years ago, fibromyalgia was thought to be like a psychological disorder.
Mm-hmm.
These people weren't having pain. There's nothing going on. Now you look at some of the research today, they could actually see, with CAT scans and MRIs and things like that, these people are actually having pain. So it's really progressed in the last 30 years. And I think maybe multiple chemical sensitivity, environmental illnesses are probably going to be follow the same path. Maybe in 30 years, we'll be talking about it as a recognized disability or illness, at least in the States. Because I think fibromyalgia, it used to be a stigma associated with a diagnosis like that. And fibromyalgia is just basic chronic pain with no explanation. That's kind of how it used to be determined or used to be described. But now there's medications for it. There's research backing up. It could be central nervous system misfiring, things like that. So it's really progressed. And I think environmental sensitivity and illnesses, I think that's going to progress as well.
Interesting. One of the statements that you have in your book is you say, I would venture to say that most apparitions, olfactory, auditory, and other haunt-type phenomena occur while the agent is still alive. And you include a story that there are several stories that you include or tell about in the book, but one of them is a story of John, whose wife Emily has an accident and appears as an apparition to John, even though she is still alive. Will you, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Let me, I love that story. It's one of my favorite ones. So I'll just read it for your listeners.
Okay.
It's in the book. It's a great story. Now John was sitting in his living room waiting for his wife Emily to come home from a girls' night out with some of her friends. And this is according to John. I had gotten a text message from Emily stating they were leaving the restaurant and would be home in 20 minutes. An hour and a half had gone by with no word from Emily. I began to get extremely worried. However, I tried to remain calm. In an effort to distract myself, I went to my office and began to surf the internet. After a few minutes, I was absorbed in setting up my lineup for fantasy football, which played the next day. Suddenly, I got chills throughout my body to the point where I noticed goosebumps. My heart was pounding, and I felt another presence was in the room. Filled with fear, I noticed on my right-hand side and slightly behind me a figure. I was too scared to turn my head, fearing that I was not prepared for what I would see. Summoning up the courage, I turned my head ever so slowly. I noticed a cloudy and transparent version of my wife. She was wearing the same clothes that she had left the house in earlier. However, they appeared disheveled and dirty. Her expression was flat, her eyes were shut, and she had blood running down her head, and her right arm also appeared to be distorted. I rose from my chair and screamed, "Emily!" At that moment, the apparition had disappeared. So this is an example. Let me first say this. It turns out that Emily, she wasn't dead. What happened was an accident occurred at the same time that John had the apparitional experience. Basically, Emily got into a car accident, causing her head trauma, which might explain why he saw some blood, and a broken right arm, which may be why he said her right arm was distorted. So if we look closely at this, it's obviously that this wasn't a ghost, right? So because Emily wasn't dead, but rather she was really injured. So this is sort of an example of what is sort of termed a crisis apparition, and it's a form of telepathy. So, in this case, there's a lot of similarities here between apparitional experiences and these crisis apparitions. So you have a sense of a presence, a visual image, the image being transparent or smoke-like and vanishing without a cause. But, in another instance, if John was in a club dancing, he probably wouldn't have had an apparitional experience because he wasn't really in a comfortable, relaxed, meditative state as well. So that's something that's important with a lot of these things. Because usually when you have these spontaneous apparitional experiences, the person's laying in bed, relaxed. They're not out clubbing or, at a football game or something like that. So that's another thing that we notice in this. But what happened here is the agent, which is Emily, the person who's sending the telepathic distress signal, if we want to call it that, she had a trauma or unexpected life-threatening injury. This is sort of the catalyst. This is setting in motion this crisis apparition. So the emotion is sort of the beginning of the process and sort of the thing that switches everything on. So the emotion causes these intense bioelectrical polarity shifts, initiates sort of our biological transmitter, sends this electrical message throughout our bodies, alters all these fields that are going on. And this is sort of the starting point that we'll be able to transmit information into the environment. So it leaks out from us into the environment. And then once it's out there, it has the ability to sort of move around. And then it sort of resonates with John, who's across town. And then the distress signal is sort of sent that way. So a lot of the spontaneous cases that I've come across, the person on the other side isn't actually deceased. It's a lot of these crisis apparitions, which is fascinating because, number one, you could validate what's happening. And you could say, well, obviously this isn't a spirit, so something else was going on here. But in the book, I also go over a lot of these spontaneous, these apparitional experiences that happen when a person has passed away. So, I look at both sides of this, and I really, after every case example that I give, I really try to explain it. So I think a lot of times in books that are out there nowadays, they'll give you these great, amazing ghost experiences, and then it sort of just ends.
And they move on to the next.
And then they move on to the next. And I remember I just reading these books, I'm like, man, these are great stories, but what the heck happened? Give me some idea or some thoughts. And that's what I really try to do in this book is, like with this John story, I go on for probably a page or two about what I think happens. And then every sort of case example that I give, I go over about what I think happens. And I go over the theories and I go over the research. And I really give the reader this a good view of what's out there, latest research and some new thoughts on it. And I really think that it's important to not only have these great experiences, but to go a little bit further and ask why. Consciousness, human dynamics, bioenergy. How is this all related to paranormal phenomenon? And I think a lot of people are interested in that dynamic.
Well, you do a really good job of, particularly with after this story or before the story, describing how emotion and bioenergy could have created this apparition, and it really, after you told this story, it really is what made me kind of understand more how you talk about the right ingredients that have to line up, and the resonance and the synchronization, like you said, and also made me understand how, you have to have, in most cases, a connection, emotional connection, family members, husband, wife, some kind of like resonance with each other. Maybe that's the wrong word to use, but and that kind of makes it, because Emily probably has no recollection of, sending that signal to John. Yep. It just happened because of their connection, I'm assuming.
Yep. Yeah.
So I loved that story because it was all like clicking in my brain. All the pieces were like fitting together. It was perfect.
And that's the start. Like this, I have the ghostly ingredients theory that we talked about. That's the start, or sort of the base of my theories. But a lot of people will come up to me, or a lot of people would read that and go, well, you're not explaining hauntings. You're not explaining ghosts. You're just explaining telepathy. So I have the other theory that I have, spontaneous apparitional trace theory, kind of goes over hauntings because it's different, right? Hauntings is probably the most popular thing we see on TV. That's where you go into a location that's a shut down hospital or place where a serious murder happened, and there's a ghost of a 18th century person that walks the hall. You know what I'm saying? There's a story behind that. So hauntings are a lot different than these sort of spontaneous apparitional or crisis and deathbed visions that we have. So the spontaneous apparitional trace theory goes over exactly what hauntings are. And I think I'll backtrack a little bit. At least when it comes to parapsychology, we get probably way more cases of these crisis apparitions and deathbed visions reported to us than we do with hauntings. Hauntings seem to be more of like a TV phenomenon, if you want to say it like that, because it's more entertaining to watch someone in a haunted house than it is to watch someone interview someone who's had a spontaneous case example. I get that, but for hauntings, have you ever heard of a theory called stone tape theory or imprint theory? Yes. So that's a very popular one. And basically what that says is that the environment could hold the memory of a past event, which, is sort of viewed, heard, tasted, or smelled, or felt at a later time when someone else is there. So what this theory is often used to explain is sort of these residual hauntings. So that's when the ghost is not conscious. It's more like a recording being played back and all that. So although there's no specific explanation for these place theories or imprint theories about how the environment holds such events or recording, the general belief is that there's an extreme amount of energy that's released during tragic events that's somehow burned into the environment. Now, that's a common theory that's been around since the 1920s. But when I look at that theory, I see a pretty glaring flaw with it. And that's that a tragic event or violent death must have occurred at a location for a haunting or these phenomenon to occur. Right? So therefore, if a location doesn't have this violent history, nothing could have been burned or imprinted into the environment, which sort of limits the haunting to one particular location. So I don't like that. So unlike the place or imprint theory, I don't believe that the event is what causes an imprint into the electromagnetic fields or the environment or whatever, but rather this telepathic distress message that an individual sent that's sort of imprinted into the environment. So what I basically say, my theory contends that every haunted location, there's an individual who sent a telepathic distress call to whom they were linked with that's sort of been stuck at that location. So it's this distress call is what sensitives and ghost hunters are encountering. And I think this can account for a great deal of sort of these recurrent apparitions. So a haunting doesn't actually have to coincide with the location of a tragic event or even a distress signal, but it could occur at the end point as well. So this would account for a while there could be apparitions of deceased people who maybe never even resided in or visited this supposedly haunted location. So that's an important distinction that I go over in the book. And I go over a lot of case examples about, how this haunting happened and what goes on with the telepathic distress signal as well.
I'm so glad you brought up stone tape theory, because that is one of the most fascinating theories that I could talk about, or at least think about. Not that I have any expertise in it, but I could just think about that. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. It's we don't think about it, but I mean, it's like I said, it's been around since the 1920s. So this is, people have been batting that thing around for years and years and years. So yeah, it's one of the best ones out there for sure.
Outside of psychology or parapsychology, what kind of nerd are you?
Well, I'm a movie nerd. Yeah, I actually built a replica proton pack. So
shut up.
Full scale.
Wow.
Replica. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. I had a lot of time in grad school. I didn't meet my wife until after grad school,
So are we talking about a particular genre of movies, or are you the Golden Globe, Oscars kind of movie nerd?
I like, I don't know what movies. I don't know if it's a genre. Typically comedies. I usually like the off the wall comedies. Ghostbusters is pretty mainstream, but like The Big Lebowski, I'm a big fan of that. I love Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, sort of that slapstick humor type thing. So I prefer comedies. I work in as a counselor, so I feel like I see a lot of drama and depression and sadness throughout the day. So I don't really want to rent a movie where anything like that is happening. So I tend to get away from that.
Completely understandable. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So if there's anything coming up for you, let us know. Let us know, what's on your site, where we can find that, where to find the book, and any final thoughts you might have.
So the book is The Ghost Studies, New Perspectives on the Origin of Paranormal Experiences. You can find the book at any Barnes & Noble's carries it, so you can walk right in there and grab one. Amazon is a good place to get the book as well. It's also available on audiobook, so if you go to audible.com, you could download it into your phone or computer, listen to it while you're working out or driving or whatever you do. The Haunted Theories is my website. You could also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Haunted Theories. Haunted Theories, the website is more or less a blog. I usually put a blog out every couple months or so. I have one coming up that I'm working on called the worst paranormal reality TV show.
I'm so there.
That's right.
I will be there.
I binge watched some ghost hunting shows last weekend, and because I'll be honest with you, I kind of catch them here or there, but I've never watched like a series from start to finish, because I don't have cable, so I never, for some reason, can get them. But I sat down and bought a whole series, and I watched it start to finish. And, I love stats, so I was just checking things that were happening and counting the number of times certain words were said. And so I got a blog coming out on that, which is pretty exciting. I love putting out blogs just to see how people react to them. But on the website, if you're ever interested in any of my thoughts or theories, I usually condense them in a couple blogs on there. I talked about environmental sensitivity on there quite a bit. It's got links to my research. And so if you're really nerdy and you want to look at statistics, it's free on the internet. You could look up all my research. It's not a problem.
I'm totally interrupting your promotion here, but what do you think about the fact that I feel like I've seen so many of the ghost shows that I'm like desensitized from them. Like when I see them now, I fall asleep and I'm bored, and I like find myself just fast forwarding through some stuff, and I'm just like, did I see this one already? I don't remember. And then they all start blending in together, and it's like, maybe I need some time off from the paranormal shows.
But I think you're right. I think that they all sort of follow the same formula.
Yeah, and maybe that's it, the formula.
You kind of what's going to happen. They're going to walk in. There's going to be the night vision. Someone's going to hear a voice, and they're going to run down. You know what I'm saying? So it sort of follows the same pattern. At the beginning, you get the history, and the camera is moving really fast. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that sort of happens, and then you kind of, like you said, you kind of get tired of it. So you fast forward to the parts that you find are going to be the most interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I get it. I really think that, these producers of these shows got to shake things up a little bit. And I often hear people say, oh, these shows are unscientific, and, they fake their evidence, and, and proper paranormal investigations aren't like that. And I say to myself, I really think that a TV show could be somewhat scientific and entertaining at the same time if it's done right. I have a lot of ideas about what they can do, and that's why I like watching these shows, because I look at them and go, man, if they would have done it like that, it would have been so much better and interesting, and they could have learned something, like what consciousness is or what imprint theory is, but they just chose not to do it, and they chose just to have the guy scream and say, "Did you hear that? It said get out, get out." You could have spent that 60 seconds talking about something else, because we've all heard "get out" before.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of rambling on there, bro.
That's okay. I took us on a tangent. No, I think there's a few out now just in the last year or so that are kind of jumping out of the box, I think.
Oh,
like,
good.
I'm loving, watch, I'll say something and it'll end up being your worst show. But Kindred Spirits, I'm thinking that's really refreshing. I
haven't seen that.
Love Kindred Spirits. I've always kind of struggled with the staginess, and I don't mean like staging evidence, but the whole, we meet the homeowner and we talk about like that whole part that they have to somehow cover, but it ends up looking like a one act play, it's really cheesy. But then everything else is fabulous. And then, is it Lockdown where it's, I'm forgetting his name from Ghost Adventures, Nick from Ghost Adventures, and the other woman, the psychic, where they spend 3 nights in a place.
I haven't seen that one either.
It is also fascinating, and considering that Nick came from Ghost Adventures, it's completely different vibe and style of that. That's an interesting one too.
Yeah, I'll have to check those out. I haven't seen those. I have to keep an eye out for those. So if they're coming outside the box, that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and not perfect, but breaking the formula a little bit and not afraid to try new things. They're not just taking the same EVP, the recorder, and it's interesting. You know,
I like when people have experiences. Like, I think a lot of times, those people will say, well, it's, if somebody screams in fear, then it's not really an investigation. It's not scientific. And listen, people get scared. If you're encountering something that's unknown and you can't have you're going to get a little scared. I think it's okay. If I'm in the dark and, and someone screams in my ear, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to probably get a little scared. I think that these genuine experiences that these people have on TV is a positive thing. I don't see it as a negative.
I think it's okay to be entertaining.
Yeah, it's also exactly. If they would have had a camera with me when I did my research at Mary Kane's Close, oh my God, people would have been asleep in 20 minutes. Because it's just me walking around taking notes and asking questions. You know what I'm saying? So it's boring stuff. So you gotta be able to be entertaining. So I get it. I do like watching some of the shows. So I know everyone has, the producers have a goal. I mean, they got to make things that's entertaining, to have advertisers, to, you know what I'm saying, to pay things, to pay the crew, so it's all, I get that part of it. So I'm not really upset with anything. Just, I want them to break the formula. That's all I really want them to do.
Yeah. Well, you rock. That was a nice little end conversation there. I don't know. I might have to figure out a way how to get that earlier in the interview, but yeah, it's been a really enjoyable conversation. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks. It was great being here.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. You can find and subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and just about anywhere podcasts are found. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
Well, if you made it this far, your Paranerd hashtag is Ghost Studies. So get your tweet on and tag myself at Big Seance and Brandon at Haunted Theories using the hashtag Ghost Studies. Till next time.